The Sonic cast is getting a lot more respect these days, or at least some members of the Sonic cast are, but even that is a huge step up from what we had not some 12 years ago. Sonic Frontiers is coming with one last DLC update, and this one's promising to bring us 3 playable characters in the forms of Tails, Knuckles, and Amy into this brand new 3D experience. But that's not the only thing on the horizon when it comes to other playable characters, because there's Sonic Superstars, the brand new 2.5D game that's going to see Sonic alongside Tails, Knuckles and Amy once again, but this time in the classic setting. And we cannot forget Sonic Origins Plus, that allows you to play as, surprise surprise, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles or Amy throughout the main 4 classic games. So we're seeing a lot of Team Sonic playable instead of just Sonic the Hedgehog, but naturally this influx might cause some to reflect on how the series has gone and question, do the games really need all these playable characters? Indeed, the Sonic series is no stranger to debates on the validity of if more quantity equals more quality, and in fact this notion has tied in quite heavily to the common phrase a few years ago you might have heard of, Sonic's stupid friends, where the general belief, if you agree with that idea, is that Sonic's friends, his expanded cast, reduce the series, detract the focus from what made it good, and overall provide a bad experience. And this was largely popularized post Sonic 06, which everyone knows by now had a magnitude of problems, not just with its playable cast. I want to squash this idea right away at the start of the video. Sonic's friends are not innately bad or contradictory to the nature of the games. And yes, Sonic 06 was a bad game mechanically, but that holds true for almost every element of that game. It wasn't the friends' inclusions in and of themselves that made the game bad. It was just one of the many convenient scapegoats that made it easy for people to manipulate the narrative. Now, the fact that people wanted to manipulate the narrative means there were, for better or worse, people who genuinely believed Sonic's friends made the games worse, and that's fair, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But let's take a look at what the series was doing before Sonic 06. Naturally, the first game, Sonic the Hedgehog, only had the true blue man himself playable, but as soon as his second game, Sonic 2, you could play as Miles Tails Prower, and yes, he was just a clone at that point, but if you played it on single player mode, he would be able to assist you, and if you played it on 2-player, your friend or sibling would be able to play with you, which does change it from just Sonic without any help at all. Sonic CD did not feature any playable characters besides Sonic, but it was developed at the same time as Sonic 2, so that kind of makes sense. But then if we blast into Sonic 3 and Knuckles, what do you know? Not only is Tails playable, but he now plays differently. He's able to fly and reach areas Sonic cannot usually. If you play with Sonic and Tails, you can even carry Sonic in the sky, which again, Sonic on his own couldn't do. Then there's Knuckles, who is one of the big marketing pushes of that very game, and with Sonic & Knuckles or the Knuckles expansion, which was the intended release of the game, he's playable with his own altered campaign and separate routes in some of the zones. So if you try to pretend as if having multiple playable characters was not this big thing in the classic era, then you're simply living in a make-believe land. Even the spin-offs were all about the playable characters most of the time. Sonic Chaos, oh look at that, it's Sonic and Knuckles. Sonic the Fighters, you can play as all sorts of Sonic characters, both Sonic Drifts, Sonic R, and a lot of these games had rewards of unlocking more playable characters. Again, they didn't always play that differently from Sonic, they usually just had a minor tweak here and there, but the point was that the idea of multiple playable characters has always been present and for a long time. And I think it makes sense because one of the Sonic brand's strongest elements is its collection of diverse and interesting characters, how they interact with the world, and how they interact with each other. Even the classic era multimedia content, such as Sonic Sat.AM, would bank on these character interactions. They were core to the series and they always have been. And once the series jumped into full 3D, it's no secret they went all in on the multiple playable character aspect. Sonic Adventure itself heralded in a new style, and this was adopted and expanded upon right the way through until Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. After which, Sega would pull back the playable character roster and drastically limit it to Sonic or maybe 2 other characters, but usually the additional playable characters from this point on were just another Sonic. And Sega seemed determined to blame the failure of Sonic 2006 on anything but the fact that they rushed it out the door. Regardless, this resulted in numerous games where it was mostly just Sonic running along, and it almost immediately became apparent that this had a drastic negative effect on the game's replayability. Now, many people will tell you that in a game such as Sonic Adventure, they only enjoyed maybe 2 or 3 out of the 6 characters. Some people only enjoyed 1, some people enjoyed every one, but the point is, we all have our differences. But when you remove all of them, the trade-off arguably is, okay, we've just got the Sonic stages, so now we're going to see more of the Sonic stages because they don't have to develop the treasure hunting stages and the fishing stages. That is the logical argument people would make, and you can see why. But that's not 100% what happened. Once we removed the other playable characters, we saw, yeah, we still have the Sonic stages, but I wouldn't say we had more of the Sonic stages. It's just that they were now supplemented with less additional content. Sonic Unleashed, prime study for this because it was the first proper game to adopt this new style, and you had the brand new boost formula, eye-catching, new way to play. But there's numerous changes in that boost formula. For a start, the levels were gated behind the medals. Whether you think they're easy or hard to get is not the point. The medal's existence is to delay your ability to get to the next level and force you to replay a level you've already beaten within the same playthrough. That is the goal. And so with the boost levels, especially because of how fast you're going, you're very likely to miss some crucial medals on the first time, maybe the second time round. So you're actually playing that same level 2 to 3 times more than you would have usually. On top of that, the boost levels are resource intensive from a development standpoint. You have to model and place so many assets that go by in a flash, whereas before you didn't progress as quickly, so they lasted longer and would provide more time of gameplay. So as a result, what do we see in Unleashed? The 3D levels having 2D sections for the first time in the series. And this also served to slow down the gameplay so that they could extend the value out of the assets they created. A similar motivation as to why they made the levels gated behind the coins as well. And then instead of having multiple playable characters that could reuse and remix those assets in different ways, maybe a little and maybe a lot, you only had one other playable character. But Unleashed did go all in on this other playable character, being Sonic's werehog form. There's no doubt they spent a lot of time trying to make this as big and as good as they could make it. It had very long levels that did take advantage of the assets Sonic usually sped by, plus making some new ones just for the werehog as well, and they had a very in-depth fighting system. I personally didn't enjoy it, but they had it. And so it did try very hard, and maybe for you it succeeded. But the werehog probably represents the best substitute for the multiple playable characters we've had since then, because each other inclusion would not be as drastically different to Sonic as the werehog was. So you're really getting Sonic Adventure's multiple playable characters, except there's 2. It's Sonic, and now it's Classic Sonic. Or it's Sonic, and now it's Shadow, who plays the same as Sonic. Or it's Sonic, and maybe you've got Tails. That's about it. So, to bring us back to where we started, the removal of all those playable characters didn't translate into more of Sonic's stages. We have around about the same Sonic stage length, and then it's supplemented usually with less content than if they had multiple playable characters, because they are an easy way of creating more content with similar assets compared to what we have now. With all that in mind, I think having multiple playable characters in Sonic is nothing but a benefit, so long as the developers don't go crazy and overscope the size of their roster to a point where their budget just can't support it. You can have a lot of playable characters if you planned that way from the beginning and know what you're doing. If you decide to add a lot of them halfway through development, then yeah, you might run into problems. I don't believe in the misconception that just because you have 6 playable characters, then the game's going to be bad. Sonic Adventure managed it very well. And again, not every character has to be a hit, especially if you separate them into their own playthroughs. You can have some that land with people and some that don't, because everyone's going to find it different. But another thing multiple playable characters get to do, other than give you multiple reasons to replay the game in a different way, is it gives the characters more time to shine. If they're playable, it means they're going to have more relevant moments, and they're going to have more ways to interact with the world that aren't in cutscenes, which means it's easier for the developers to fit more content in for them. I truly believe that the series returning to this idea of actually using their characters both in stories and in gameplay and allowing us to choose who and which we want to engage with is only a positive to the series. The gap in time from Sonic Generations to about 2022 or 2021 for the series was probably the worst time period to be a Sonic fan, in my opinion. People call the Dark Ages the 2000s, basically. I think that term belongs in the 2010s, but that is a completely separate conversation. The main point is I'm happy with seeing playable characters come back to the forefront, and I hope it's continued to be expanded upon reasonably, and maybe give some characters that aren't just in the core cast their chance to shine too. But what's your opinion on this? It's a diverse topic with many reasons to side or not agree with me, so I'm eager to hear your own thoughts. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you have a great day, and to see you next time, this is the Mighty Emperor signing off.